Lesson this evening in our Building Up One Another series is entitled Accept One Another. We're going to be looking at Romans chapter 15 and verse 7. If you want to be going ahead and turning over there. I made a mistake last week. It wasn't an intentional mistake. It was something I overlooked. There were two handouts for last week. There were 2 pages that were stapled together, and I believe probably most of you, if you were here, got that handout. But there was another separate page, and that extra page is really the one we spent all of our time on, and you probably did not have an outline for that. So they are back there now. So when you leave this evening, please pick one of those up and put them in your folder. If you hadn't gotten a folder yet, to put your lessons in, there are some back there, and most of the back lessons, we still have copies of them that you can bring yourself up to date on. So that was my bad, not pointing that out. They were there, but they weren't in clear sight. And so if you look over that outline, everything I said will make a whole lot more sense to you. Or maybe it will, I don't know. Let's look at the verse, Romans chapter 15 and verse 7. Paul simply says here, "Wherefore accept one another, just as Christ also accepted us," or it may be you, "to the glory of God." So obviously the admonition that we're interested in this evening is the admonition to accept one another. Now what does that mean to you, to accept one another? Or what do you think Paul may have meant here? What does it mean to accept one another?
Accept one another to the point that we accept these differences that we have and walk together for the glory of God. Sometimes we can get so wrapped up in minor things and we fail to focus on what's good for the glory of God. Because all of us have differences. We come from different backgrounds. But we need to learn to accept one another, walk together for the glory of God. Now that's my take.
Well, I think you've got exactly the right idea. Let me ask you this. Is he saying here that we are to just tolerate one another? No. It goes way beyond tolerating one another.
Right.
And it means looking beyond the things that can separate us and looking at the person instead of those things. Too many times we look at things that bring up barriers before we even see the person. But what we've got to do as Christians, especially in light of this command, is to look beyond those things that could separate us and be difficult for us to accept, and look beyond those things and see the person. Some people never see the person, they just see the things that can separate. And we're going to talk about some of those things also. Now, there's another part to this verse, and I'm not going to say it's more important, but I think it's just as important. What's the second part of the verse that we need to be mindful of? Wherefore accept one another, how? Or to what degree, or in what way? Just as Christ has accepted us. Now there's the real kicker on this thing. What does it mean, just as Christ has accepted us? Anybody here perfect?
No, He accepted all of us as we are.
Okay. That reminds me of a story. And let me tell you something. I know some people, all they wanted to hear is just hardcore doctrine. You know, Jesus wasn't that way. Jesus used human interest stories. He told parables, all kinds of things he referenced in his teaching to make his teaching more relevant. But there was a preacher one time, and he was trying to make the point that no one was perfect. And, he thought the best way to do that would just be to ask his congregation. He said, that question. So he said, is there anybody here perfect? If you are, just stand up or raise your hand. And lo and behold, the last person in the world you'd think would stand up and reply to that was, Brother Jones. I'm sorry, Ken. Between the Jones and the Smiths, do we have any Smiths here? Okay. Brother Jones stood up, and the preacher said, Brother Jones, do you mean to tell me that you believe that you're perfect and that you've never made any mistakes? He said, no, preacher, but I'm standing here on behalf of my wife's first husband. Evidently, he never made any mistakes, So what we're saying is none of us are perfect, but Christ has accepted us. With all of our ugly parts and not so pretty parts, not talking about physically, talking about spiritually and things, Christ has accepted us. And so, yes, ma'am.
And we got to remember that we're all made in God's image.
Well, we are. We're made in God's image. And, of course, He loves us, just like we love our children. Most of us, some of you may have perfect children. I don't know. I was not a perfect child, nor were my children perfect. And so, but do we still love them? Do we still accept them? Sure. And so that's a key part of it, that we are to accept one another just as Christ also accepted us to the glory of God. So, He could have just said, wherefore accept one another, and just put a period there and dropped it. But I think that extra phrase, and I wish we had more time to actually talk about that more, but we just want to focus more on this idea of accepting one another. On your outline there, the first thing that we have, two barriers to following this command. One is prejudice. Showing partiality. Prejudice is simply to prejudge somebody. If you're prejudiced against a person or a group of people or whatever, you have prejudged them. That's what the word prejudice means. It's a very real problem that will prevent us from accepting one another. It must be stated in all fairness that all people are somewhat prejudiced, or at least biased to some degree. A person caught up in some cultural bias may not even be aware of his or her bias. And so the first problem that we have to deal with is prejudice. We've got a couple of verses there referenced. Let's look at those. Romans chapter 12 and verse 16. This is in that chapter that we looked at last week, or we have looked at before. Romans 12:16 says, be of the same mind toward one another. Remember, do not be haughty in mind, but associate with the lowly. Do not be wise in your own estimation. We're going to look at, in just a minute at one of the factors that was a problem for a lot of people. And it was their social status. How much money they had. And then, of course, James deals with that. Let's go to James chapter 2 and let's look at some verses there. Let's just start reading in verse 1. My brethren, do not hold your faith in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ with an attitude of personal favoritism. There's your barriers. There's your prejudice. For if a man comes into your assembly with a gold ring and dressed in fine clothes, And there also comes in a poor man in dirty clothes, and you pay special attention to the one who is wearing the fine clothes, and you say, you sit here in a good place, and you say to the poor man, you stand over there or sit down by my footstool. Have you not made distinctions among yourselves and become judges with evil motives? And so what was the barrier here, or what was the problem with them accepting people? Okay, who they were, their wealth, their status, and how could you tell who was wealthy and who wasn't wealthy?
Their appearance.
Okay, their appearance, their clothes, where they had a lot of gold. You know, when I was in preaching in Brunswick, we had a visitor down there. I won't mention his name. He's fairly well known. When I retired from the insurance and financial services industry, I got a Rolex watch. It was the cheapest Rolex watch in the world, but it was a Rolex watch. Now, this man had a Rolex watch, and it had 60 diamonds around it. And so that was quite impressive. But they were very nice people, very humble people. But anyway, here's the point. You can tell by people's appearance most of the time if they're rich or if they're poor. Now, James goes on to say in verse 5, listen, my beloved brethren, did not God choose the poor of this world to be rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom, which he promised to those who love him? But you have dishonored the poor man. Is it not the rich who oppress you and personally drag you into court? That may be a generality. In other words, why favor and show special attention to these rich people when typically they're the ones that's going to, give you a hard time and cause you problems? And goes on and so forth. Verse 9, but if you show partiality, you are committing sin or convicted by the law as transgressors. And so their problem was they were making distinctions. They were prejudging people based on their appearance, how wealthy they might have been. They were catering to those who were very wealthy. Does Jesus see that when he looks down on us? What does Jesus see when he looks down on us? Just us. He sees through all that stuff. He sees through all that stuff. How do we today sometimes show our wealth? Maybe we don't wear a lot of gold, I don't know, but what are some other ways you can show your wealth? And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I'm just saying, how would we tell today who was wealthy and who wasn't? Okay, automobiles. What are you driving? Huh? The house. What kind of house do you live in? Is there anything wrong with living in a nice house? No. Typically, it's a good investment. Get a good house as you can. But don't go overboard just to try to impress people. You know what? Keeping up with the Jones. I tell you what. I'm not going to say I wish you wasn't in my class, Kim, but it sure does make it hard for me to. Keeping up with the Joneses. Y'all ever heard that? Okay. Keeping up with the Joneses mean buying things that you don't need with money you don't have to impress people you don't like. That's what keeping up with the Joneses is. But Jones Ken is a great person. I'm glad he's in my class. So what might have been some other cultural things that would have been a problem or a barrier between them back then?
Jews and the Gentiles didn't mix.
Pardon?
Jews and the Gentiles did not mix.
Okay. Nationality was a problem, and we're going to talk about that more in just a minute. But what else?
Education.
Okay. Huh? Okay, well, we could take that a little bit further. Say, were you a slave or a free man? Would that be a distinction there? What if you were a slave of a master and he had brought all his slaves to church with him? They became converted, and one of them was especially spiritual minded and eventually became an elder in that church of which his master was a member. Could that have happened? The slaves were the one who really had most of the education. They were the ones who could do everything. You know, the rich people just, they were, well, this is a crude word, they were just dumb. But somehow or another they had slaves. No slave did everything. They were the smart ones. You know, today they would be the mechanics, the plumbers, electricians, you know, and all that, the accountants, and so forth. So anyway, what else? There's one more that I think is not obvious, but one more that's important. What about gender? Gender. Did God have anything to say about male and female and their place in the church? Well, he did as far as roles and things like that, but I'm talking about two places, Galatians 3:26 and 27 especially. You know, there's neither Jew nor Greek, you know, bond nor free, male nor female. Now, that doesn't mean there's no distinction in the church when we come to the roles that different people are to play, but it means in God's eyes we're all a soul. We're just a soul. We're a human being, part of His creation, made in His image. And so we've got to learn to look beyond all these cultural things. I also want to mention race. I don't know. It's not a good situation in America or anywhere else really about some things in relationship to that. But let me remind you some things from the Bible about that. Did you know that Moses was married to a black woman? Did you know that it was a black man that rescued Jeremiah out of that miry pit that he had been thrown into, and he would certainly have died? And the man's name was Ebed-Melech. He's the one that got together a bunch of men, and they tied a bunch of clothes together and lowered them down in there and told Jeremiah to wrap them around his waist, and they pulled him up out of there, you know. And, of course, in the New Testament, we have the story of the Ethiopian eunuch. Now, he probably was a proselyte. Why do we think he was a proselyte? Well, where had he been? He'd been to Jerusalem to worship God. Plus, at that point in time, no Gentile had become a Christian without being a proselyte. We don't have anybody become a Christian without being a Jew until Acts chapter 10, till Cornelius. He was the first Gentile to become a Christian without becoming a Jew first. And so, in Acts chapter 8, you have the Ethiopian eunuch who was reading the Bible, Isaiah chapter 53. Of course, it didn't have chapter and verse divisions then, but he you know, as Peter approached him, he said, "Do you understand what you're reading?" He said, "How can I except some man help me?" And so he read to him from the passage and talked about being like a lamb led to the slaughter. He said, "Who's he talking about, him or somebody else?" And Peter preached. Not Peter, Philip. I keep saying Peter. Philip preached to him. And what did he preach to him? Jesus. And what did the Ethiopian want to do after Philip preached Jesus to him? He said, "Here's water, what doth hinder me to be baptized?" So people say, "Well, y'all just need to preach Jesus. Don't worry about that baptism stuff. If you preach Jesus, you're going to preach baptism." Because Philip preached Jesus to the Ethiopian eunuch, and his response was, "Here is water, what doth hinder me to be baptized?" And then he got out of the chariot, and they both went where? Down into the water. And he, what? Immersed him is the word, and they both came up out of the water. Now, again, like one of my teachers told me, Did they vote on his membership? No. There wasn't anybody else there except the horses, and all they could say was nay. No, they didn't vote on his membership. And so, race, gender, economic status, social status, all those things were really pretty big issues. I don't think we can imagine the gap between the Jews and the Gentiles. I just don't know if we've got any situation. That was the big one right there. That was the big one. On the day of Pentecost, if you'll let's look over at Acts chapter 2 right quick, there was some things going on there. When Peter started preaching, and he says they got down to, let's go down to verse 7. You know, they were speaking, and the people were hearing them in their own language. Now, that was not a miracle of hearing, it was a miracle of speaking. It was a miracle of speaking. And they were amazed, marveled, saying, why are not all these who are speaking Galileans? And how is it that we each hear them in our own language to which we were born? Now, who are these people? These people are proselytes. They're not Jews by birth in the Jewish nation. Look where they're from. Parthians, Medes, Elamites, residents of Mesopotamia, Judea and Cappadocia, Pontus and Asia, Phrygia and Pamphylia, Egypt and the districts of Libya around Cyrene, and visitors from Rome, both Jews and proselytes. A proselyte was a Gentile who became a Jew in that way. But still, even then, you've got people here from different places with different dialects, you know, different cultures, even in that early stage. But didn't seem to be a problem. Until about 10 years later. Up until this point in time, only Jews and proselytes had the gospel preached to them and could be saved under the law of Christ. God says, you know what? It's time to open this thing up to everybody. Time to open it up to the Gentiles. Now this is going to be a tricky thing. First he had to get somebody that would go and preach to the Gentiles. And who did that turn out to be? Peter in that situation. Secondly, he had to find the perfect candidate. He had to find somebody with absolutely no flaws in their character. He had to be the ideal person to be this first Gentile convert. And who was that? Cornelius. If you read about him, you'll see in the first few verses, now there was a certain man at Caesarea named Cornelius, a centurion of what was called the Italian cohort. He was a devout man, one who feared God with all his household and gave many alms to the Jewish people and prayed to God continually. I mean, you know, you say, well, there's not many Christians that do that, you know, and he wasn't even a Christian. He was a Gentile, but he was a believer. He believed in God. Okay, so we've got the perfect candidate here in Acts chapter 10. Now what we've got to do is find the perfect preacher. Well, let's take old Peter, for example. How did God call Peter to preach to Cornelius? He was in a trance. He went up on the rooftop about the 6th hour, which was what? Noon, lunchtime. Went up there and was praying and fell into a trance of some sort and saw a vision. What was that vision? Huh? Okay, this great sheet let down from heaven had all kind of animals in it, 4-footed beasts. It says, I don't remember, how exactly did it say. One of them should have been, a all kinds of four-footed beasts and crawling creatures. Those are snakes. The word there is a word for snake. A bunch of snakes in that thing. And birds of the air. And a voice came to him, "Arise, Peter, kill and eat." What did Peter say? "Not so, Lord, not so. I've never eaten anything common or unclean." Well, directly he went back in that trance again, and here comes down that thing from heaven. "Arise, Peter, kill and eat." "Oh, not so, Lord, not so, Lord. I've never eaten anything common or unclean." 3 times that happened. Peter couldn't figure out what was going on, so finally he said, and God said, "There's some men going to come to you. You go with them." And so he'd already talked to Cornelius. Cornelius sent some men over there, and they went back. Peter went back with them and everything, and so he preached the gospel. And I still don't think Peter was convinced. He says in verse 34, as he started preaching, "I most certainly understand now that God is not one to show" what? "Partiality, but in every nation, the man who fears him and does what is right is welcome to him, is acceptable to him. The word which he sent to the sons of Israel, preaching peace through Jesus Christ, he is Lord of all. You yourselves know the thing which took place." And so he goes on and talks about that. And finally, one more thing did God have to do to get Peter and those who were with him to accept Cornelius and baptize him. The miraculous empowering by the Holy Spirit. They began speaking in tongues, just as Peter later on says, just as we did at the beginning, on the day of Pentecost. Now that was for 2 reasons. Number one, it was to convince Peter and those who were with him that Cornelius was a candidate for baptism. Because after that, Peter said, how can we, we've got to baptize these people. But it was also a sign, because what happened in Acts chapter 11, Peter got called on the carpet, went back up to Jerusalem, and was called on the carpet by the folks up there because he had baptized a Gentile convert. And so Acts chapter 11, you've got Peter telling this whole story again to the elders and the folks up in Jerusalem, and that right there sealed the deal. When he told them about the Holy Spirit empowering them miraculously, that was the thing that sealed the deal. So that happened not only to convince Peter, but also so he could tell those folks up in Jerusalem about that. And so that was a big deal for the Gentiles to come into the kingdom. Now it evolved into a problem which could have very easily torn the church apart. And that problem was the Judaizers. And we mentioned these earlier. The Judaizers were a certain group of Jews who believed that Jesus Christ was okay, but you still had to keep the law of Moses in order to be saved. And so Paul dealt with that in his preaching, primarily in Galatians and Romans. He dealt with legalism, the Judaizers, and all that, and pretty much put it to bed. Pretty much put it to bed. And so then we come on up till to later times in the church. There were still problems in the church. In Corinthians, you have people who were, you would think they were pretty bad people, but how does Paul start that letter to the 1 Corinthians there? He calls them what? Saints who had been sanctified. And so they were brethren. They had some issues and so on and so forth, but they worked through that. Now, let's look at the questions there. I want us to spend some time. And number 2 up there, we didn't really get to it. Setting up our own standards. Often we set up extra biblical standards that people must meet before we fully accept them. If that one is accepted, then it will be on our terms. This, of course, is not the real standard, and obviously it is wrong. And if we have any extra time, we'll get to Romans chapter 14 and talk about that. So let's look at our questions and give you a chance to talk a little bit. Why do we find such a command in the Bible? Well, was it a problem then? Is it a problem now? It's always going to be a problem, isn't it? Because of human nature. And we have so many examples of it in our Bibles, but we can find examples of it today too. Number two, what situation existed in those days that would have required such a command? Okay, what's a caste system? C-A-S-T-E. What's a caste system?
Thinking that some people are lower than others.
Okay, you got levels or degrees. In some places like India and other places, if you're born into a certain level of society, you can't escape. I mean, that's where you're going to live and that's where you're going to die. Now, that's a general rule. I don't know if it's still that way or not, but it's been that way in the past. And so it wasn't put to bed itself, even in the first century. It's always going to be a problem, and it may be a problem more in some areas. I mean, we're pretty much of a homogeneous group here, We all like Georgia football, and if there's anybody that doesn't, they're probably not going to admit it. But, we're all reared in the same environment, and there's not many real barriers, to accepting one another here as far as any kind of cultural thing, But the situation will always need to be addressed. What are some standards that some people have set up in addition to what the Bible has to say? What are some man-made standards? Not thinking so much about fellowship right now, but just there was a church that I was interested in going to preach there, and I found out something later on that somebody had come into their assembly and somebody had said, "We don't want that kind of people here." I am so glad that I never got hooked up with that congregation. So, what kind of people were they talking about? I don't know. I got an idea. Number 4, many denominations have some standards of fellowship in addition to what Christ has set forth. What are some of them? And we may be getting into some things here that's more than just culture. What do a lot of denominations have that you have to accept along with the Bible? Creed books, the Methodist discipline, the Baptist manual. They all have, quote, creed books, and you pretty much have to accept those if you want to be in their fellowship. Now, you may not know this, but the old traditional wedding ceremony, how many of you were married with a traditional wedding ceremony? Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today in the face of God, and in the face of this company inside of God, to join this man, this woman in holy matrimony. And so that comes directly out of the Methodist discipline. That is the Methodist discipline marriage ceremony. Huh? Well, it still works. I guess. We may find out one day. Oops. But here's the thing. I'm not real smart. I'm smart enough to say that part. If there's anyone here who has any objection to this man and this woman being united in holy matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. No way I would say that. You're just inviting problems. So that's a standard that men have come up with in addition to the Bible. Can you or do you truly accept all other believers, saved people we're talking about, as brothers and sisters in Christ. I hope that all of us can answer yes to that. And as far as I know you guys, I think that is the truth. I don't believe there's anybody here in this room tonight that would not accept anybody, regardless. Now, I think we've got another question related to that, and we'll get to it in just a minute. Let's go down to verse 7. Is there a distinction to be made between accepting someone and accepting their wrong behavior? Yes. Hate the sin, but love the sinner. We can accept them, but that doesn't mean that we're accepting or approving wrong behavior. So we've got to make that distinction. Now, when say some person, I've sat down with people in one session and taught them the gospel, and they were baptized, that same time, and I know they didn't know everything there was to know about being a Christian. So were they going to lead a completely faithful life in every area and never sin or commit a wrongdoing? No.
Neil,
Yes.
how many sermons did the eunuch hear?
What's that?
How many sermons did the eunuch hear? He was taught when he was taught about Jesus.
Just one. One. And we don't know how long it was, Now, Paul, most of what we have in our Bibles is like the Reader's Digest condensed edition, Now, Paul preached one time so long somebody went to sleep and fell out the window. That's why we don't have windows that people can sit in. We don't want anybody sitting in the window and falling asleep and falling out, because I don't think there's anybody here that can raise them from the dead. But I guess if I had to go, I guess that'd be okay. Verse number 8, how will we act towards someone we don't accept? Let's just say there's someone that we don't accept for whatever reason, good or bad, and we can't accept them. How are we going to act toward them that's different from acting the way we would act towards somebody that we do accept?
Don't speak to them.
Okay, ignore them. What else? Yeah. Avoid them. Yeah. Avoid them. Yeah. Talk about them. Yeah. Oh, that's great ideas, great responses. Yeah. From our text, what is the key idea that is the motivation and guideline for accepting one another? Now, we mentioned this, but listen, from our text, that's Romans 15, verse 7. From our text, what is the key idea that is the motivation and guideline for accepting one another? Christ accepting us. How can we not accept somebody when Christ has accepted us? Number 10. Perhaps this brief study has made you aware of some false standards that you have set up. What are they? Now, I don't expect anybody to admit that they've set up some standards, false standards about acceptance. So if you know one on somebody else, then you feel free to tell that one then, What about? Let me see. I'm trying to find a good example. As I look around this room, I see many examples,
One of the standards is how a person dresses.
Okay. Yeah. Now, there are some guidelines about dressing. We need to be careful how we dress. Where's Lonnie? Remember that guy? We went and taught those people, did the open Bible study in those apartments, and That guy and some more in his family came to church. He was a big old guy. As a matter of fact, when we baptized him, we had to take 2 large baptismal garments and tie them around him. I mean, that's how big he was. But he come to church one Sunday morning, and everybody was all dressed to kill, you know. And here he comes in there with a pair of shorts, which there's nothing wrong with that. But, and I'm sure some people probably looked at him and said, you know, that's not right. Well, he didn't know any better. I mean, maybe that's the best he had. I don't know, you know. But, you know, how people dress could be a problem. We had somebody down at Lindale one time. She came. One time she come wearing a dress. It looked like a party dress. And she really needed to have something else over it. And it was pretty obvious. No, I don't think anybody said anything to her then, but if she had worn that again, I believe somebody would have, you know. You know, I guess I would have had to if nobody else did. But anyway, okay. Okay, any questions you have about any of this, or any situations or incidents, or you'd like to share, or any comments, or you want to add?
I had my husband died at his funeral. The girl came and wore a really short dress and it looked not right. And I approached her kindly. I didn't approach her mean. And asked her, you know, what appropriate, you know, and she said, you were going to come, would you kindly do that, please? I told her kindly if you would.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I've seen some women at funerals that wearing a dress that they left. Evidently, they don't wear it very often except at funerals, and they left it in the closet too long and it shrunk. And they need to trade it in for a bigger size, you know. And maybe that's what was going on there. I don't know. I tell you what, I think probably we're almost out of time, but here's what I really would have liked to have gotten into, and that is Romans chapter 14, and that is setting up not doctrinal, but barriers or standards of fellowship that have to do with our practices, you know. I'm going to talk till the bell rings. I didn't hear it. I didn't hear it. At the word of 2 or 3 witnesses, let everything be established. How many of you actually heard that bell? Go in peace, be you warmed and filled.